They say the best revenge is living well, but I discovered something even better. The perfect silence that comes when your enemies destroy themselves while you watch from the shadows. My name is Thomas Hartwell, and this is the story of how I turned my wife's betrayal into the most elegant form of justice I've ever witnessed. I'm 51 years old, a financial advisor who spent the last 25 years helping wealthy clients protect and grow their assets. My specialty is risk assessment, identifying potential threats to financial security and developing strategies to mitigate them. It's ironic that I spent so much time protecting other people's wealth while missing the biggest threat to my own stability. My wife of 19 years. Rebecca and I met at a charity gala in 2004. She was a real estate agent specializing in luxury properties, and I was already establishing myself in the financial planning world. She was stunning, ambitious, and had this magnetic personality that drew people to her like moths to a flame. We seemed like the perfect power couple. She sold million-dollar homes while I managed the investments of their buyers. Our marriage was, by all external measures, a success story. We lived in a beautiful colonial in the most prestigious neighborhood in town, drove luxury cars, and were fixtures at every important social event. Rebecca had built one of the most successful real estate practices in the region, while my client list read like a who's who of local business leaders and old money families. The first sign that something was wrong came during our annual financial review in March. As someone who manages money for a living, I'm meticulous about our personal finances. Every year, Rebecca and I would sit down to review our investments, insurance policies, and financial goals. It was always a pleasant ritual, a chance to celebrate our success and plan for the future. But this year, something was different. Rebecca seemed distracted, almost anxious, during our meeting. When I mentioned that her business account showed some unusual large deposits followed by equally large withdrawals, she became defensive. She claimed they were related to a complex commercial deal that required temporary holding of client funds. But her explanation was vague and inconsistent. More troubling was her reaction when I suggested we increase our joint investment contributions. Rebecca had always been enthusiastic about building our wealth together, but now she seemed reluctant to commit more of her income to our shared financial goals. She claimed she needed to keep more liquidity for business opportunities, but something in her tone suggested there was more to the story. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention to Rebecca's behavior patterns. As someone trained to spot financial irregularities, I couldn't help but notice the personal irregularities that were becoming apparent. She was working later than usual, taking more weekend appointments, and seemed to be spending money on things that didn't appear in our household budget. The breakthrough came when I was reviewing our credit card statements and noticed charges at restaurants and hotels that Rebecca had never mentioned. When I asked about a particularly expensive dinner at Le Bernardin, a restaurant we'd never been to together, she claimed it was a business dinner with a difficult client, but the timing was wrong. The charge was on a Tuesday evening when she told me she was showing properties to a family from out of town. That's when I realized I needed to conduct a more thorough investigation. I started with what I do best, following the money. Rebecca had always handled her business finances independently, which I'd respected as a matter of professional autonomy. But now I began to wonder what those finances might reveal. Using my access to financial databases and my professional network, I started building a picture of Rebecca's recent financial activity. What I discovered was both shocking and illuminating. Over the past 8 months, Rebecca had been moving significant amounts of money through a complex series of transactions that seemed designed to obscure their true purpose. She'd opened new accounts, made large cash withdrawals, and was spending far more than her legitimate business income could support. But the real revelation came when I identified the source of her additional income. Rebecca wasn't just selling real estate. She was involved in a sophisticated money laundering operation that used luxury property transactions to clean dirty money for a network of criminals. The man at the center of it all was Vincent Caruso, a businessman with connections to organized crime who owned several legitimate businesses that served as fronts for his illegal activities. Rebecca had been helping him purchase and sell high-end properties in transactions designed to make illegal money appear legitimate. She was being paid handsomely for her services, but she was also putting herself, and by extension our family, at enormous legal and physical risk. The affair was almost secondary to the criminal activity, but it was there too. Rebecca and Vincent had been sleeping together for over a year, conducting their relationship in the same luxury hotels and restaurants where they conducted their illegal business. She'd been living a double life, playing the role of respectable wife and businesswoman while secretly working for criminals and betraying our marriage. As I pieced together the full scope of Rebecca's activities, I felt a cold fury that was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. This wasn't just adultery, it was a complete betrayal of everything we'd built together. She'd put our reputation, our assets, and our freedom at risk for money and excitement. She turned our home into a potential crime scene and our marriage into a cover story. But I'm not the type of man who acts on emotion. I'm a strategist, someone who thinks in terms of long-term consequences and calculated moves. If Rebecca wanted to play dangerous games, I was going to make sure she understood the true cost of her choices. I spent the next month documenting everything. Every transaction, every meeting, every piece of evidence that connected Rebecca to Vincent's criminal enterprise. I built a comprehensive case file that would have impressed any federal prosecutor. But I wasn't planning to hand this information over to law enforcement, at least not immediately. Instead, I was going to use my knowledge to orchestrate something much more satisfying. Rebecca's complete downfall, engineered by her own choices and executed with the precision of a master financial strategist. The first phase of my plan involved Vincent's legitimate businesses. As someone with extensive connections in the financial world, I had access to information about credit lines, business loans, and investment opportunities. I began to quietly share concerns about Vincent's businesses with key financial institutions, raising questions about the source of his capital and the sustainability of his business model. I didn't make any direct accusations. I simply asked the right questions to the right people. Questions about cash flow patterns that seemed unusual. Questions about business relationships that didn't quite make sense. Questions that prompted more thorough reviews of Vincent's financial activities. At the same time, I began to plant seeds of doubt about Rebecca's real estate practice. I had lunch with other financial advisors and casually mentioned some concerns about unusual transaction patterns I'd noticed in the luxury real estate market. I suggested that some agents might be getting involved in deals that weren't entirely legitimate, without ever mentioning Rebecca by name. The beauty of this approach was that I never had to lie or make false accusations. I simply shared genuine concerns and let other professionals draw their own conclusions. The financial and real estate communities are small, and word travels fast when people start asking the right questions. Within weeks, both Vincent and Rebecca were facing increased scrutiny from banks, regulatory agencies, and professional associations. Loans were being called in for review. Transactions were being delayed for additional documentation. Business relationships that had seemed solid were suddenly becoming complicated. But the real masterstroke came when I realized how to turn Rebecca and Vincent against each other. Vincent's criminal enterprise depended on maintaining a low profile and avoiding attention from law enforcement. The increased scrutiny that was now focused on his businesses was exactly the kind of heat he couldn't afford. He began to suspect that someone in his organization was either careless or disloyal. Rebecca, meanwhile, was starting to panic as her real estate deals became more difficult to close and her professional reputation came under question. She was making mistakes, becoming sloppy, and drawing exactly the kind of attention that Vincent had warned her to avoid. I decided to help them both understand that their partnership was becoming a liability. Using anonymous communications, I began feeding each of them information that suggested the other was becoming a security risk. I sent Vincent evidence of Rebecca's increasingly erratic behavior and her failure to maintain proper operational security. I sent Rebecca information suggesting that Vincent was considering cutting ties with associates who had become too visible. The effect was immediate and devastating. Their relationship, both personal and professional, began to deteriorate rapidly. Vincent started distancing himself from Rebecca, canceling meetings and refusing to take her calls. Rebecca, realizing that her lucrative arrangement was falling apart, became desperate and began making even more dangerous choices. She started reaching out to other criminal contacts, trying to replace Vincent's business with even riskier opportunities. She began taking larger risks with money laundering transactions, hoping to prove her value and secure her position. Every choice she made drew more attention and created more evidence of her criminal activities. The final phase of my plan required perfect timing and a deep understanding of how law enforcement investigations work. I had been carefully documenting Rebecca's activities for months, building a comprehensive case file that included financial records, communication logs, and evidence of criminal transactions. When Rebecca's desperation led her to attempt a particularly large and risky money laundering operation, I made sure that the right information reached the right people at exactly the right time. An anonymous tip to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, supported by detailed documentation of the criminal enterprise, triggered a comprehensive investigation that swept up both Rebecca and Vincent. The arrests were swift and thorough. Rebecca was charged with money laundering, conspiracy, and tax evasion. Vincent faced additional charges related to his broader criminal enterprise. The evidence against both of them was overwhelming, thanks in large part to the comprehensive documentation I had provided to investigators. But I wasn't finished. The final element of my revenge was perhaps the most satisfying, because it addressed the personal betrayal that had hurt me most. Rebecca's arrest and the subsequent investigation revealed the full scope of her double life to our entire social and professional community. The woman who had built her reputation on trust and integrity was exposed as a criminal who had been living a lie for years. Her real estate license was revoked, her assets were frozen, and her reputation was destroyed. The divorce proceedings were swift and decisive. With Rebecca facing serious criminal charges and her assets tied up in the investigation, she had no choice but to accept the settlement I offered. I kept our home, our investments, and my clean reputation, while she faced the prospect of years in prison and financial ruin. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my home office, managing my clients' portfolios and rebuilding my life. Rebecca is in federal prison, serving a 7-year sentence for her crimes. Vincent received 15 years and lost everything he'd built over decades of criminal activity. My financial advisory practice has never been stronger. Word spread through the community about how I had cooperated with federal investigators to expose a criminal enterprise, and clients began to see me as someone who could be trusted to protect their interests no matter what. My reputation for integrity and careful risk assessment became my greatest professional asset. But the real victory was personal. For 19 years, I had been married to a woman who saw me as a convenient cover for her real life. She'd used our marriage as camouflage while she pursued excitement and easy money with criminals. She'd put everything we'd built together at risk for her own selfish desires. My response proved that she had fundamentally misunderstood the man she was married to. The careful, methodical financial advisor she had dismissed as boring and predictable turned out to be capable of orchestrating her complete destruction with the same precision I brought to managing investments. The man she had betrayed had outmaneuvered both her and her criminal associates so thoroughly that they had ended up destroying each other while he watched from safety. Every morning when I wake up in my comfortable home, free from the weight of a criminal investigation and surrounded by the success I've built through legitimate means, I'm reminded that sometimes the best revenge is simply ensuring that people face the natural consequences of their choices. Rebecca chose to betray our marriage and break the law. I simply made sure those choices had appropriate results. The silent treatment I gave her, never confronting, never accusing, just quietly documenting and strategically revealing, proved more devastating than any angry confrontation could have been. Sometimes the most elegant revenge is the kind that looks like justice.